Welcome to Rise Above, the podcast where we turn pain into purpose and struggle into strength. I'm Jacqueline. While this is my story, I hope that you can find pieces of you in it that can inspire you and resonate to instill at least a little bit of hope to know that no matter how hard or what you may be going through, there's always light at the end of the tunnel and you can always rise above it and grow from that situation. So I do want to give a trigger warning. Today's episode is going to talk about sexual abuse. It's going to talk about violence. It's going to talk about things that may be triggering to some individuals. So please watch as your own discretion. Pace yourself. You don't have to watch the entire episode. Watch it in increments if that's best for you. But I also want you to pay attention and take care of yourself while you are watching this podcast episode. So we're going to talk about how your upbringing affects or is a catalyst to things that you may tolerate while you're growing up and you're going through the different stages in life, or mold your personality and your perceptions of what the norm should be. It's important to know that in life, we repeat what we don't repair. What does that mean? We'll talk about that towards the end of the podcast. I want you to keep that in mind so you can have your own definition of what that may mean to you. What it means to me can mean very differently to another person. No two people interpret the same meaning of certain things. So as you all know, as in episode 1, I grew up in the Bronx with my parents and with 4 siblings. So we were essentially a family of 6. My parents were very young when they married, 15, 17, and started having children at the age of 17, and my dad was about 19. So they had 4 kids. I was the youngest of 4. I am the youngest of 4, and different age ranges. Like me and my sister are 10 years apart. My brother that's before me is 7 years apart, and my oldest brother, I want to say we're about 15 years apart. Our house was the house to be. We had a lot of house parties. We grew up in the days where in house parties, when your kids fell asleep, they would go into the coat closet. They would not put me in the coat closet. We would go into the room where had all the coats, and you would find kids laying there because the party was going, right? So we had a fairly decent upbringing. We were very well taken care of. We always had clothes. We went to school. We had food. We were very well taken care of. But in the process of my parents being so young and learning how to become adults and parents together at a young age, and also learning what they wanted out of life as individuals was rough. And I do want to say, before I go any deeper, like, this episode is not to place blame on my parents at all. It's to show how things from my best perspective, what was interpreted as a young child growing up in the environment that we grew up in, how some of the decisions that were made affected me and molded the person that I was throughout most of my life, and things that I had to heal from that were rooted from my childhood. For my parents, this is not to place blame. This is just from my perspective. I understand that the choices that you have made were only in the best interest for your kids and yourself, although that we may have interpreted things differently. And one thing that I do want to say that I've learned about being a parent in general, just me as being a mom, there's always going to be something that your kids are going to think that you should have done differently because it affected them in one way. And that's okay. Being a parent, mom or dad, you learn along the way. There's no manual on what's right or what's wrong. You go according to times, and then you also base your parenting on how you were raised and what you would like to do differently, what you would like to keep from what you were raised, and what you definitely would not do because it affected you in a certain way. So for me, while we grew up in a pretty decent home, there was alcoholism involved, and there was some physical abuse between my parents, and we experienced that, right? So I don't want to dive in too deep into that because that is something very, very personal, and I don't want to expose a story like that of my upbringing in detail without having consulted with all of my family members, because that doesn't only affect me. So taking that into consideration, Um, Due to alcoholism and some other abuse going on, domestic violence going on, um, there was times where financial instability was present. So we did get to a point where there was some financial struggles, and my mother made the cognizant choice to move to Puerto Rico with myself, and my sister and her niece, her child at the time, tagged along. Well, they didn't tag along. She decided she wanted to go, and we all went together. At least that's how I remember it. It could be different. I don't know. So at the age of 11, in April 12th, 1992, um, we took a flight and we moved to Puerto Rico. I didn't know Spanish. I didn't know how to speak it. I didn't know how to write it. I didn't know how to read it. Obviously, I was enrolled in school, and I remember there was one teacher that she asked me in Spanish, she's like, "Do you know what I'm saying?" And I was like, "No." And she set me aside and she taught me. She taught me, she told me the difference, and she would pull me aside and she would help me with everything. And because of her, I wasn't skipped, I wasn't left behind. So I wish I could find this teacher today. I don't remember her name. I want to say Miss Robles, but I don't remember. And it was a school in Peñuelas, Puerto Rico, that I was enrolled in, because I had gone to other schools before moving to that part of the city, but no one really noticed. I kind of like, I don't even know how I winged it through, to be quite honest. Um, and while I was able to get my way through, because this was a different culture for me, because yes, I'm Puerto Rican, but I'm American born. Like I was, and I know Puerto Ricans, yes, are citizens, but the culture living on the island is different than the cultures in a Puerto Rican that was born and raised in New York. Completely different. So, at age 11, I was enrolled in Federico Vegetao at first, and there was an incident with my cousin in that school. Um, and we had to transfer to another school. So I had to go into another school, and there I experienced a lot of bullying, to the point where I would leave school and they would throw me with rocks. I would come home with bruises all over my arm. Back then, I didn't defend myself back then. I kept to myself. And that was because I didn't know anyone. I didn't know how to speak Spanish. I didn't know how to write. I didn't know how to, really read it. I was still learning. And I had I had friends, a couple of friends, female friends that I knew because of my aunt. When we moved over there the first time, we moved to a city in in Puerto Rico, in Ponce, Puerto Rico, and I knew people because of my aunt. So we moved into a place that was like the hottest spot there. So I would go to school with them and I would try to hang out with them, but still people would make fun of me because I was American. I was chubby, so I experienced a lot of bullying. Um, and at some point, like my cousins would ask me what the bruising was on my arms, and then they went to the school and they defended me. So that kind of stopped because they didn't realize I was related to them. And we had to move to another city. I had to go to another school because financially, my mom and I weren't making ends meet. And in that second school, I experienced sexual harassment at the age of 11, 12. At that point, my mom would not let me shave my legs, and they would compare the legs on my hair, the hair on my legs. This is very uncomfortable for me to talk about, but I think that is necessary to spread awareness. Um, and they would relate that to any hairs on the parts of my body. And I did, and I went and I told my mom, because this specific kid, would follow me all over the place. And it was harassment, it was bullying as well. Like they would call me, back then they would call me Buduska. And my coping mechanism was to eat. It was to eat. So not only to eat, I kept to myself. I didn't think that I was pretty. At one point, I was jumped by a group of girls, and the girls that I was with did nothing. They did nothing. And I got a black eye out of it. And of course, my mom went to school and did everything that she needed to do. We pressed charges, everything that was. But in Puerto Rico, you do that. That creates a whole nother layer. So between the age of 11 to the age of 19, I pretty much lived back and forth from New York, Puerto Rico, Connecticut, New York, Puerto Rico, Connecticut, until at the age of 19, I decided that I didn't want to do that anymore. Every move that I made showed me how to be adaptable. I had to be adaptable. I didn't have any choice. While I know that decision that my mom made to move as many times as she did was based on what she felt was right and what she needed to do, and how her brain processed what her process needed to be, it doesn't change that those moves affected me in not pleasant ways. And remembering it's hard. That was a really tough time. I remember, like, I would keep quiet. I didn't share that with anyone, with absolutely anyone. And because of the bullying, because of the harassment, um, as an adult, and because of my upbringing with seeing the domestic violence, when I started to get into relationships or like boys or whatnot, I was very quiet. I would deal with disrespect. I would deal with anything that came my way, because that's what I knew. I was being bullied. I would settle for whoever would say that would like me, because my self-esteem was shot. I didn't have any self-awareness. I didn't know what self-love was. I didn't know what self-care was. I didn't know what self-wellness was. I didn't know all of that, because back then when you were growing up, they didn't talk to you about that. They didn't say, you always gotta love yourself, put yourself forward. You can't allow. They never sat down and had those conversations. Again, I'm not blaming, but that's just how it was back then. It was just like you went through things and you dealt with it, and that was it. When I got into my first serious relationship, that molded me to accept the physical and the emotional abuse, and then I would just keep it quiet. I would keep it quiet. And when I did my self-love trip in Bali is when I realized that the root of me settling in relationships and going after men that we would break up and force myself to kind of like to want to force the relationship to work was because of how I grew up, was because of all the bullying. It was because of everything that I had to deal with. And that's when the healing for me really started. So the moving taught me how to adapt. The upbringing taught me that the norm was emotional abuse, was the physical abuse, because that's all I knew. And that's not the norm. No one should think that that is the norm. No, absolutely. It is not normal for your partner to call you outside your name, make you feel like you are less than the dirt that they walk on, or belittle you. That is not the norm. And if any of you are experiencing any of this, there are hotlines that you can go out and have support. Comment below. And if you want resources, I'll send you those resources. I don't have a problem with that, because I didn't know back then that there was hotlines for sexual abuse, that there was hotlines for domestic violence, that there was hotlines that would help you for relationship, interrelationship, I think it's called, abuse, right? That they kind of help you get out of that, and they give you ways and options and resources to kind of determine yourself what you're in. So growing up in that chaos is what made me confused. So it's like if you take one person that grew up in a home where their parents consistently worked, they made sure the bills were paid, there was no instability, they always had food, and it was always loving. That's going to be your norm. That's what your expectation is going to be for the next, when you start being an adult. So for me, and again, it's not like that with every person that grows up in chaos, or that grows up in norm, right? Because it could be that they meet someone and that person, you know, did something, and they fell in love with that person, and they have the misconception of what love is, and then they change, and their upbringing has nothing to do with it, right? But for me, my upbringing had a lot to do with what I accepted in the relationship. Because I'll tell you this much, I have my siblings that were not in abusive relationships. They may have had their own demons that they had to work with, but they weren't in abusive relationships. And I wasn't aware that that wasn't normal. I thought that that was normal. I thought that that's what it was about. I mean, you know I that's just the way that I interpreted things as growing up. I can tell you this though, when I finally had my daughter, and one thing that I said was like, we're not moving all over the place, because although moving taught me how to be adaptable, that's not stable. That's not a stable environment. Like, your kids should be able to go to the schools that they should be going through, which should be the elementary school, the middle school, the high school, and then college. Um, and have that stability, make friends, grow up with their friends, and just experience life in a difference. Like I didn't inherit my best friends until I was in high school. I can't say that I have many friends from my elementary school because I moved around so much. I can't say that from my middle school, because I was there the longest. We did like 2 years, and we we did keep in touch for the most part. But when I moved back to Puerto Rico, we lost touch. And because of social media, they remembered me, and we've been in touch through social media. But that's not the norm, and I must confess that while the two best friends that I have since high school, those are more than my friends. Those are my sisters. They see me in every phase. They know what I've been through, and as an adult, because I went through all of that and I suppressed all of that, it was like a volcano. It was just building and building and building and building, and then it erupted. And how did that erupt? I would not stay shut for anyone. I got to a point in my life that I was like, rah, 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 like a chihuahua, rah, 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 right? And that was me projecting everything that I was feeling, everything that I had been put through, but I was projecting it in the wrong way. I wasn't thinking about what I was saying. I was taking it out on people. And then as I started getting to toxic relationships, it added another layer, because then I didn't want to share it with my family, what I was going through, because I was worried about them. And I would pick arguments with those that were closer to me. One thing that I would say is, like, as a parent, I was very conscious of making sure that my daughter didn't see a lot of the things that I went through. But most recently, I realized that my daughter had an interpretation of certain things that I was saying. Felt like I would yell at her a lot, and that was me projecting. And I'm receptive to that, right? And that goes to, like, that was not my intention. I wanted to give my daughter a different kind of life and upbringing that what I had. And I'm not talking about the clothes and the food, because we always had that. But I didn't want her to be exposed to emotional abuse. Like, I would tell my daughter all the time, I was like, you's a baddie. And I love that she grew up with that confidence. I didn't have it. I didn't have it because that's not something that was spoken about. And the tears are not because I still dwell on it. It's just the remembering of what I went through and how painful it was for me to go through that, which added another layer of emotional eating. I, I, there was at times my weight was always up and down because I would emotionally eat, but I wouldn't change what I went through, because now I've done a lot of healing. I've done a lot of growth where I can articulate to someone, like, you will not speak to me like that. And if you insist on speaking to me like that, you don't need to be in my life. And it doesn't matter who it is. It could be a family member, it could be a cousin, it could be a friend. No one should put you down. And one thing that I will say, that while I'm in this healing journey, you can definitely see someone that is not healed and that they're in need of healing. But it's not my job to tell them they need to heal. I support them. I'll give them my perspective of things and tell them, when you're ready, I'm here to support you. I'm so grateful for everything I went through, because it showed me resilience, it showed me adaptability, and it showed me how to be empathetic. And it also showed me the realization that we all have a story. So if you go somewhere and you're like, oh my God, they were so rude, stop for a moment and just think, what might have happened to them in that day or in their life that they're projecting what they're feeling through that. That's not for everyone. Some people have a good grasp of their emotions and they can just be like, have a blessed day, and they don't even know how they're going to pay their rent. But the reality is that most people are not like that. And one thing that I want you all to reflect on, for me, I kept finding versions of home in people who reminded me of my past because I hadn't healed. So that was accepting toxic relationships, accepting people that I should have not been with, forcing things to be the way that I wanted it to be. If it's forced, it's not genuine. If you have to force it, it's not for you. Because whether it's in a relationship, whether it's in a parental relationship, whether it's in a sibling relationship, when someone wants to be a part of your life, they will. And it doesn't have to come with a price. Keep that in mind. I always say my daughter saved me. But what really did it for me was when I decided to move from New York to Miami. That is when the real healing started, because I didn't have to bury myself in being a mom. I was alone and I was forced to deal with all of those feelings and emotions from my upbringing, from the things I've gone through, while I go through the different stages in my life, and the toxicity that I've been through in the relationships, the traumatic events that I went through with the 2 losses. I had to deal with all of that. I had to actually process my emotions, and it was difficult, but it was worth it, because today I'm a different person. Today I'm a different person. Anyone from my past that tries to come and say, oh, we should connect, I'm very like, why? Have you grown? Have you healed? I'm not entertaining that. I know what my worth is now. I have a lot of self-love, self-awareness, and I always say that what sparked that here in Miami was when I did my bariatric surgery. Because I was so heavy, because of all of the emotional eating, because of everything that I went through, I buried myself in eating food. And it wasn't until I had health scares that I was like, I need to do something about it. So I hope that what we talked about here resonates with someone, or in a different way. It doesn't have to be the moving aspect of it, but every move, every city, everything that I've been through has taught me resilience, adaptability, empathy, and to take others into consideration. I don't ever want to choose to erase my past, because I wouldn't be the person that I am today. I learned from it, and I've had the consciousness of every mistake that I've made, every decision that I made that has been in my control, has been the universe realigning me to where I'm supposed to be. And every decision and every mistake that I've repeatedly made is because there was a lesson that I needed to learn that I wasn't learning. And the universe and God was saying, girl, I don't want you to continue going through this. I'm going to need you to see the message. I'm going to need you to see that you're the one that's in control. You do not have to tolerate this. You are not your past. perceptions of your past are not who make you the person that you are. And that took a lot for me to learn. And it wasn't until I decided to heal, it wasn't until I started to put myself first that I would determine that. So if this episode resonated with you, please subscribe, like, follow, share, or if you feel like it would resonate with someone else, I appreciate you guys watching. I've had a good, a lot of views that I'm really surprised with, and that just tells me that I'm in the right path of doing what I want to do and inspire others for healing and instill that hope that, again, no matter what you go through in life, no matter how long it takes, you can always rise above it. What doesn't break you makes you stronger. I'm living testament of it. Until the next episode.